Posted by user extension stock 6735. Guy hits on my wife, gets political, and tries to take my players. Quote, this is a not safe for work thing. So I was DMing at my house. They were my friends since early college. One of them wanted to invite another friend over because, quote unquote, he needs a buddy right now. I relent thinking it's because he's depressed or something. I was wrong. So the only important people you really need to know are Buddy and my wife, girlfriend at the time. So Buddy gets there after all the rest of us and notices me and my girlfriend cuddling on the couch, watching TV until everyone shows up. He proceeds to hit on my girlfriend relentlessly until the rest told him to knock it off. I decide to let it go because he stopped and I'm willing to give this guy the benefit of the doubt. So we start getting character sheets set up. This is session 0 and it's Pathfinder, so it takes a while. When someone makes a joke about the election, it was obviously just a joke, and it was about this taking forever. Buddy took it a bit personally and started stating his political views loudly and aggressively. We ask him to stop kindly and he refuses, getting louder. So I tell him that if he can't control himself, I will ask him to leave. He's already caused enough discomfort. That is when he loses it, claiming I'm treading all over his rights and free speech and stomping around the house. I tell him flatly to get out of my house. He then looks at all my friends and says that they should come over to his place for game night instead. They all refuse because I'm obviously the one who planned this. So he storms out. I thought that this was the last of it, but I was wrong. After he left, I was told why he needed a buddy. Apparently, he was a repeat offender of... oh gods. And was going to jail for years soon. My friend wanted me to bring a sexual predator into my house. Needless to say, that friend is no longer a friend, and Buddy's still in jail, as far as I know. Yeah, this friend is a complete, absolute piece of shit for why would you think that would be a good idea? Why would you simply think, why don't I go ahead and bring Ladder with Steven Crowder in here in this house, and I'm sure everybody will be fine with it. I mean, he's gonna be going to jail for being a sexual predator, so, but I'm sure it'll be fine. Yeah, no, you definitely should not be doing that in the first place, and you really need to think about who your friends are if you're thinking that's okay. Just wow. Hello, lovely travelers and seekers of tales of amusement and entertainment. It is I, the Lunar Skald, here to regale you with stories that will fancy all of your curiosities. Now, for this episode, this isn't necessarily going to be one where it's like, haha, it's really funny to be able to... well, I don't know if you really think of it's funny, but, I mean, it's kind of funny to make fun of just how bad somebody is and think that they're in the right. But this one is a bit more serious. Mostly because it involves something that a lot of us can probably be a bit familiar with. Family dynamic and the satanic panic. Whenever there's anything that just doesn't line up with a Christian parent's religious dogma, it's automatically contrived as a absolutely horrid, satanic, and heretical thing that one should never be involved with, lest their souls suffer the eternal damnation of hell itself. Now, I'm going to go ahead and offer a little bit of leeway here. I'm probably not the best when it comes to judging things as satanic, considering my intricacies with the devil. Definitely gonna be waiting for your call, darling. But in all seriousness, as important as it is to understand that there are plenty of really good Christian people that are very understanding and really do want to try to bring the best out of Christianity by spreading love and joy, we always have to remember those who are more than willing to use a religion like Christianity so that they can go ahead and bash people in with the Bible, possibly quite literally, if I'm being perfectly honest, and be more than capable of calling them out and being able to see them for what they are. And in all honesty, while this OP is kind of questioning whether this story is an RPG horror story, I think it is very much belonging in an RPG horror story because I think we ought to understand exactly just how bad the Satanic Panic was, not just in considering D&D, but also in just generally anything. But since this is relating specifically to D&D, let's go ahead and not wait any further and get right into the story. This is posted by Barber NC. Parents decides D&D is satanic. Extra long. Hello, this is my first time posting something like this, and I'm not sure how long it will be. So I'm going to go ahead and put the short of it first so you can decide if this is worth your read. Also, I'm not sure this counts as an RPG horror story, but I'm not sure where else to post it, so if this gets taken down, I understand. I'll try to section it so those who don't care about backstory can just skip to the parts they care about. Again, this is my first time posting here, so sorry if it's messy. Content warning. Mentions of injuries and illness and mental illness. No, I'm not looking for charity or anything like that, just wanting to get this off of my chest. TLDR, after several years of quote-unquote tolerating D&D, Dad waits until I'm too sick to move and out of the house to bring people into my room and get rid of everything D&D or related to it. Backstory. So, I'll give some backstory to help put some things into perspective. About 5 years ago, I graduated high school. I had been super into LARPing, en garde if curious, and had been for most of my high school career. My parents had always been super supportive of it. My dad even going so far as to send pics of me fighting to family and friends. Well, after high school, I signed on to go on a mission trip to another country with my church that I went to at the time. Unfortunately, the bus got into a terrible accident on the way to the airport. I was in the hospital for a while, having broken several vertebrae, the sternum, and a left hip, as well as a myriad of other injuries. This is important because it ties into how much D&D meant, and still does, mean to me. I won't go into the details of how the recovery went and all of that, but to sum it up, lots of scars, long recovery time, back never recovered, and developed a lot of new and long-lasting issues. I am now in pain in 24 hours a day, and will be for the rest of my life. With all of that out of the way, I'm sure it's no surprise that I had to quit LARPing. I also no longer got to work at my old job at the grocery store, as lifting, bending over, standing for more than an hour, even sitting in most chairs for an hour all caused unbearable amounts of pain. What's more, my plans after high school was to go into the military and were now squashed. I ended up gaining a huge amount of weight because, well, it hurt to do almost anything. Needless to say that I fell into a pretty deep well of depression, and I won't go into details, but let's just say that it got dark. I stopped going to church completely, and I really don't consider myself a Christian at the moment. The only thing that brought me out of it was D&D. My experience with D&D. I was lucky that after high school, I kept my core group of friends, and they were very supportive. If it hadn't been for them all wanting to try out D&D, this story probably would have ended a lot worse. We all fell head over heels for D&D, and have been playing for the last 4 to 5 years. During this time, I fell down the rabbit hole of being a dice goblin. I loved dice, and spent a lot of money over the years on all kinds of sets of dice. My friends knew this, and for Christmas and birthdays would usually get more dice. Some of these friends I've grown apart with, and that's just life, and the dice that they get from me were very sentimental because of this. I also would buy other D&D things like dice cages, wooden dice towers, dice bags or wooden vaults, books, minis, and so much more. I even had a set of D&D Anniversary Sapphire dice. Needless to say that all of this D&D stuff added up in value, probably around $2,000 to $3,000 US in money spent. Family's view on D&D. I live in an old-school Christian household, and so my parents at first weren't too thrilled about me playing D&D, the whole satanic panic and whatnot. After I explained what we did and how it worked, they decided that they were fine with it, but probably shouldn't talk about it with the grandparents. I would tell them the stories from time to time, my mom particularly enjoying them, and even started on B-days and holidays to get me dice and other D&D gifts. Getting sick. So around a couple of months after COVID hit the US, I suddenly started getting sick. Mainly just stomach pain, nausea, and what usually comes with nausea. This got to a point where almost every day I was sick, and I traveled with a bucket everywhere. Everything would set my stomach off. Food, touch, needing to use the bathroom. Hell, lying in bed would make me sick. I ended up developing terrible anxiety with nausea, which, ironically enough, would usually make things worse. This went on for 9-ish months. My mother, bless her soul, helped me out whenever she could, sitting with me through anxiety attacks, getting meds, taking me to doctors, everything. The horror story. So during me being terribly sick and needing to be with someone else who could help me when it got really bad, I ended up usually wherever my mom was. One week, my aunt and uncle, who normally watched my grandmother, went on vacation, and so my mother and myself stayed at their house to give her the 24-hour care she needs. I couldn't help much because I was constantly sick and ended up either in bed or in the bathroom for most of the time. I think I got desperate, and so during a conversation with my parents, I talked about possibly going back to church. My dad was elated at hearing this. He had been trying to get me to pray and read the Bible to stop me from being sick. Well, a few days later, I was stuck in bed. He said that the church pastor was going to come over and talk with me. I thought, okay, kind of weird and out of the blue, but sure, I guess. And so said that I don't care. My mom had been kind of distant the last few days and kept asking things like, "You know we love you, right?" And other stuff like that. But I was too sick to really think of anything of it. Okay, so if I can pause this story for a moment, I really first want to congratulate this mother for being so supportive and so caring for her son. I mean, she has been so helpful throughout his time, and at first, yeah, she was kind of with her husband when it came to not being thrilled about D&D, but at the same time afterwards, when she was very supportive and she loved and enjoyed hearing all of the interesting stories that he had, and I really loved the fact that he would get gifts from her in the form of a dice that he really liked, and most of all, just being there whenever he needed her. Especially with, I mean, being sick for 9 months, I can't possibly imagine something like that. I mean, even at my most sick, and I'm sure some people may be able to, but I most definitely would not, and I have to say props to you for that. The father, however, I am already seeing just so many problems with him. The only time it seemed to be that he seemed to be supportive of his son was when he seemed active or wanting to be able to prove just how great he can be. When it came to LARPing, I'm sure that seemed like, oh hey, he's already preparing himself for the military, and I'm enjoying that. But now that he's not able to go into the military, it almost feels like there's a bit of a drop, and of course the D&D part. Oh, that. The fact that he was, well, I mean, he already shows himself to be unsupportive, and we'll probably see more of that later on. But the fact that the only other time we show his dad being happy when it comes to his own son was how desperate, how elated he is at hearing how desperate his son is looking for help, and that he's willing to go to church. That dad, I can already say, go fuck yourself, in all honesty. Because if the only way you can possibly be happy about your son is that he's thinking about going to church again, that is really telling about your character, and it shows that you care more about your religion than your own damn son. Which, you know, in my honest opinion about Christianity, I think that's rather fitting considering that God decided to sacrifice his own son because of his own needs. That's just my perspective on it, but anyways, let's move on to the story, shall we? Well, time rolls around and I'm in bed, and the preacher comes over and starts talking to me while I'm lying in bed. He asks how I am doing, what's it been like being sick, and other just general stuff. Oh, I don't know, just being sick feels like hell. Oh wait, I bet you were waiting for me to say that, weren't you? Sorry, moving on. He suddenly shifts to the work he's done as a preacher and how he's counseled lots of people in bad situations. He started talking about other young guys who were down and depressed or feeling ill or whatever. At first I thought, is this man about to start preaching to me about porn? I kinda chuckled at the thought internally, but he went a different route. He said that all these other guys had something in common, and it was that they played D&D. He then started talking about how D&D is satanic and that the reason I'm so sick and depressed is because of demons that I've summoned myself through D&D. He then asked me what I thought about all of that, and I'll be honest, I don't remember exactly what I said, and the conversation that went down afterwards from the emotions that what followed in a moment. I remember saying something like how I respect his opinion and all that, but he has never played D&D himself, nor seen me play, or what we do in my group, so I absolutely do not agree with him, nor will I ever. We talked a bit more, and I was starting to get a bad feeling when he said that he thinks I should talk to my dad. Me being sick in bed and not really having a choice in the matter said, fine, whatever, and he left. Now the conversation that happened next is kinda hazy, but I'll recount it the best I can. My dad comes in and immediately says that all my D&D stuff is gone. Everything. He talked about how he, the preacher, and some other men from my church had gone into my room 6 days prior, just after I had left the house to stay with my mom and grandmother, and they went inch by inch through my entire room and collected anything D&D or D&D themed. That meant any posters or books or collectibles that they thought was D&D themed. So years of books from all throughout my life, manga, sketchbooks, memorabilia from my childhood, all of it they took. They then divided the loot between all of them and went to homes of church members in all different directions and threw it all away. My dad had waited to tell me to make sure that the garbage had come twice between when they dumped it, and now so that there was no chance I could go and try to find out. He said that he is not sorry, and he will never apologize for this. He also said he knew this wouldn't and won't stop me from doing D&D stuff, but did it to protect his family. He said, don't ever bring stuff like that into the house anymore, and he isn't afraid to do this again, and that the reason I'm sick is my fault, and that I'm possessed by demons that I summoned through D&D. I was in shock. I couldn't believe what I was hearing and kinda zoned out after he left. I got my cousin to take me by my house so I could see for myself. After going into my room and fully understanding what had actually happened, that what my dad told me had actually happened, I just kinda broke down. I found out later that no one else in my family that knew, which was really just my mom and my sister, supported this. My dad had even taken a set of dice that I had bought just a month prior to give to my sister because she had joined her first D&D campaign. My friends immediately wanted me to move out, but with my condition and having very little income, I couldn't. My mother told me that they had even asked an old friend of mine who had once upon a time played D&D with me, but has since moved on and we don't speak. What he thought about D&D, and he had told them that basically from his experience there was nothing to be afraid of or worried about with D&D or my group I game with, and he is a missionary. The follow-up. Needless to say that my relationship with my dad has never been the same. I decided to pretend that everything is alright so I don't get kicked out while I go through school to get a job. I have since patched things up with my mom, who hated that this happened and doesn't agree with it, but she believes that a Christian wife has to agree with the husband's decisions, even if she doesn't like them. I also have a newfound respect for my sister, who, while they were throwing shit away, managed to save my favorite book series that I'd read since the 4th grade. Aragon, if anyone is wondering. I still do D&D and have about 3 new sets of dice I've been gifted over the last year, but they stay with a friend whose house we do D&D at. Also, the sickness that I was having and no one could figure it out just needed my gallbladder removed. Now I'm fine, besides the bus injuries and depression. End of story. So, what do I even necessarily say about something like this? Reading this, I'm not surprised, really. I'm not surprised at how far of an extent that parents like this would go. When it comes to parents like this, well, more specifically in this case, parent, when it comes to a parent like this, they just think they can simply do whatever they want. They're a narcissist through and through. In fact, people like this are simply just narcissists through and through. And unfortunately, religions like Christianity do tend to make people like that. And outside of Christianity, yes, there are people like that. There are atheists that are like that. But if there's one consistency that we can most certainly think of, at least in our particular society, is that there are plenty of gung-ho Christians who think that just because their religion is seen as the one true religion, because Christianity is the most popular religion in American or quote-unquote Western society, that they can simply just act however they wish in the name of their god. Which, again, rather fitting for the religion considering he seems to do a lot of things whenever he feels like it, and will be more than willing to break his own rules because he wants to do that. I am going to admit that I have a bias against Christianity. Not Christians, but Christianity. And people who do have quite the, how should I put it, the absolute audacity to do things like that, I'm simply just not surprised by, but I am incredibly disappointed nonetheless. And really, the fact that they tend to end up having a lot of power in society. The fact that they can simply just act however they please, and nobody has a problem with it. They can simply just act however they want with their family, and nobody can really do anything. And while there are options like child protective services and other things like that, in some ways, sometimes those measures aren't even enough. Because a lot of the time, kids don't even necessarily know they're being abused by parents like this. When children are being abused or being manipulated by people like that, they aren't necessarily going to know what being abused is like because they think that that abuse is just how parents normally are. Taking away their stuff, just getting rid of whatever valuables they think shouldn't be there, taking away independent thoughts, taking away any sort of thing that differentiates what the parent wants from parents, or from their kids. I've been through that. And while things have been getting better between me and my dad, things aren't necessarily the same either. And so I do know what it's like. And I didn't even necessarily think of child protective services at the time, despite how much it was damaging me. And I regret the fact that I didn't. But at the same time, I didn't even realize it was an option. So I really just hope this is something to keep in mind. That when you're a parent, the way that a parent should be, that you do not get to decide everything about your child. Teach them right from wrong, teach them to be a decent person, but the moment you try to take away the thing that makes that person who they are, when you try to take away whatever makes them happy, when it is hurting nobody at all, whenever you think that you should just be involved in absolutely everything and just try to direct them on some singular path that just will not happen, that is simply where you are not being a parent. You are being your own dictator that is clearly having problems with wanting to be able to have control over everything and everyone. We get it. You're a pathetic narcissist. You are simply just somebody that wants to act like they get to be in charge of something, and so you like to take charge of people that you can easily manipulate. And because of that, it gives you some sense of satisfaction that you are in charge and you can simply act however you please. But really, I hope that reality comes knocking at your door and you get the teeth knocked right out of your head, because it's about time that somebody shows you that not everything gets to go your way, and at some point, people are gonna have enough of it. And once you realize that, you're gonna realize you have nobody under your control anymore. And then you'll just be alone. Sad, depressed, and realizing that you fucked up bad. I also incredibly feel bad for the OP's mother. The fact that she truly believes that because she is a Christian wife, that even if she disagrees with her husband, that she has to stand by him. Girl, I know that a religion like that is simply just trying to control you. But at the same time, have some respect. Whether you are worshipping of this god or not, you are a person in your own right. You are beneath no one. Nor are you supposed to treat people as if you are above them. You are a mother, and yes, you are a wife. But when it comes to a relationship, you are both supposed to be equal partners. Your husband is not above you. And if you truly believe your husband to be some good Christian, you should at least have to think that your husband would have some sort of respect for family. And if he's not actually going to have the respect of his family, then you should be more than capable of telling him off and telling him that he is not acting like a good man. That he is not actually thinking of his kids, but instead is just thinking about himself and how he thinks everything should be. And I am definitely hoping that whatever this man gets, that this father, this husband, this godly man, that I certainly hope that his pride will most certainly lead to a horrifying fall in his end. But with that, I'm just going to end the video. And I know this is a bit more of a personal video, more of an emotional video, but I hope that this is something that gets out and it actually does have some important information and advice for you. I feel like this is a subject that is important and it's honestly very personal for me. So with that, I'm going to end the video, and be sure to give a like button for the video as well, subscribe if you wish to see more RPG horror stories, and I promise you there are some that are going to be far more entertaining, but this one was more on a serious note. And with that, I'm ending the video, and until next time, may the lunar embrace you as you sleep well this night.